everyone. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the brand new hybrid cloud certification that Microsoft announced at the Windows Server Summit on September 16th. So in this episode, we've got Mike Bender, who's an author evangelist with Pluralsight. We're going to be talking all about the certification, what it is, what the requirements are, why IT pros should look at it, and lots more coming up next on the DOJO podcast. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the DOJO podcast, the podcast designed to help you become the IT black belt within your organization. As always, my name is Andy Syrewicze with Hornet Security, and I've got a buddy of mine on here that you've probably seen on a previous episode. I got Mike Bender with me. How's it going, Mike?
Great, Andy. How you doing today?
Doing good. You know, when this topic came up, you were like top of mind for who I wanted to talk to about this particular topic. And we're talking about the new hybrid cloud certification that's come out from Microsoft, right? And the thing I've been hearing around the community, the I don't know if I want to say funny saying, but like the tagline saying I keep hearing is Windows Server's back, baby, right? And while I don't know if that's 100% true, it's definitely partially true. And that's the whole hybrid angle of this discussion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it always makes me laugh because, both of us know Jeff Woolsey. And if you talk to Jeff, the first thing that'll come out of his mouth or Ned's mouth when somebody brings up, oh, server's gone away, they're like, dude, our entire cloud's built on servers. So, that's, what's super important about this whole cert is what people have to remember is that the lessons from server are what are built into Microsoft's cloud. So like Hyper-V and their containers, I mean, that Azure's built on top of many of these things. So, server going away, means that, we're years away from that. And I think a lot of it's just really come down to, I remember you and I have been talking about this for a while. It was probably like, I remember when the big push at like the last year of TechEd and then into Ignite was really Azure all the time. They never talked about any of the server stuff. So there came to be this kind of like, oh, server's going away. And, just not really recently, because if you really talk to the people that are building these, it hasn't gone away.
Nope.
What's happened is a couple things. Is one, that Windows Server is really the bridge for most organizations to connect into the cloud.
Right. And
we'll talk about, some of the different things that really, really focus in on that. The other thing that's important for people to understand is that, I can't remember when it came out, but it was a couple years ago, and it was pretty big when Microsoft came out and said hybrid is a destination. So everybody thinking that every organization is going to be cloud native, that's not, we are nowhere near that being a thing.
Definitely.
So this hybrid destination for people is going to be one that I'm guessing a lot of organizations are probably going to stay there for a good period of time. So I think this certification is a great way for, people to, test their skills. And, maybe if you're new, a great way for you to be able to kind of get your arms around the content and the skills and the feature areas that are necessary for you to be successful in this hybrid environment.
Definitely. I'm glad you brought that up, the whole concept of hybrid being the destination, right? Because, going back to TechEd 2014, or the first year it was called Ignite, which was 2015, right? There was very much this, I would almost say community panic almost, that like, oh my God, they're expecting us to do 100% cloud, right? And that's, like you said, the vast majority of organizations, hybrid is going to be the destination. I spent a year it was actually last year, I went and worked for a local cloud service provider here in the Michigan area. And, we, as an exercise, when we'd bring on a new client, we'd say, hey, okay, can we take this client 100% cloud native? Because from a supportability perspective, that was like the place to be. They broke very rarely if they were cloud native, just so much easier to support. Everything's accessible from anywhere. So we try to get them there first. But more often than not, hybrid ultimately was the destination, because there was always that legacy server that was stuck on premise that they couldn't get rid of, or there was some regulatory reason that they had to keep their data within the four walls of their organization, or maybe they had like a colo somewhere that they wanted to hold on to. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's definitely, I think that's more the reality for most people than cloud native, even though cloud native is awesome if you can get there. Yeah. So yeah, I was definitely happy to see the announcement of this certification at the Windows Server Summit. That was the 16th of September, if I remember correctly.
Correctamundo.
Yeah, and so basically what they're calling it is the Windows Server Hybrid Administrator Associate is what the certification is called, consisting of 2 exams, so AZ 800 and AZ 801, which right there, just the titling of the exams gives you a good indication that, hey, there is a cloud component here, right? So it's matching the AZ labeling scheme there. So the first exam being, your hybrid core infrastructure, and the second one being advanced services. So, from my understanding here, and you can jump in if you want to add anything here, Mike, is as I was looking through the exam objectives, it's very clear that Windows Server is a huge chunk of this. I think it was Oren had a blog post where he was talking about the different components of this particular certification. And one thing that really stood out to me, at least spoke to me, was he mentioned that, back in the server NT days, you had wins was really important, right? In the server 2000 days, AD was like the big thing. And then 2008/2012, Hyper-V and virtualization was the big thing. Now, he was likening the cloud as the critical component and feature of Windows Server 2022, which I thought was really neat, right? So kind of looking through the exam objectives here, I think you've had a chance to look through these as well, right? I wouldn't say they're official exam objectives. I think these are just coverage areas is what they have so far. I would have to guess they're probably still working on the official blueprint, right? From what I saw...
Actually, if you go to the official right under skills measured and download the skills outline, the skills outlines are available for each one of the exams, so it fully breaks out all of the objectives for you. So those are, my understanding, those are locked.
Oh, nice.
I could be wrong, but normally how this kind of works is they kind of lock those in, and then they begin the process of getting the exam built, getting the questions built, and then the beta, which is probably going to happen in the December timeframe. Right. That's what's happening now. So if you take a look at either one of the pages, 800, 801, and click on the download the exam skills outline, that'll bring you the outline for each of the specific exams.
Oh yeah, yep.
But I think, the way to really think about these, because I've spent a ton of time really digging into these. I haven't talked with him personally, but I've been communicating, message back and forth with Oren, read all of the blog posts, videos, gone through everything that's really out there about this. And, some really important points for people to just kind of think about this is that if you think about your core infrastructure, what is that? We're talking compute, we're talking networking, we're talking identity, we're talking storage, and we're talking the management of your things. That's what's covered in the core area of that. And then when you get to the advanced services, that's going to be your more advanced sort of things like How do we do monitoring? Backup and HA. Security is in the advanced, even though there's going to be security stuff covered throughout the other one. High availability, and then the migration pieces. So kind of the more advanced sort of thing. So if you're kind of think about it, okay, 800 is going to be, okay, this is your really foundational toolkit of the things that you should know as a system admin. 801 is going to be those, okay, the senior admin or the principal admin on your team. These are going to be the things that they're really going to be involved with. So, from a learning standpoint, this is, of course, going to be an 800. You go to 801, and, I think there's a ton of great information out there. Kind of an interesting thing that I saw the same thing where, it was mentioning all of these different things that came out. And when you look at Oren's study guide, I believe it's his study guide, you'll notice that some of the documentation for some of the things goes back to 08 and 08 R2 and 2012 and 2012 R2.
Right.
Because there's many of the things that have simply not changed.
Right.
So for the most part, Active Directory has not changed in decades. There may be little tweaks here and there, but how it works is fundamentally the same. Hyper-V, there's brand new stuff as far as the, what you can do within Hyper-V and some of the features and stuff. But from the grand scheme of things, Hyper-V is not changing much.
Yep.
DNS is DNS, DHCP is DHCP. So most of what's the new stuff is going to be, how do I integrate this hybrid? So, how do I make these connections into Azure to be able to leverage Azure along with my hybrid environment?
Yeah, definitely. That makes all kinds of sense. And I'm glad you brought that up too, about how AD is largely AD as it was years ago. Same thing with DNS, DHCP. I feel like there's a lot of system admins that are still stuck in that, hey, there's a new version of server. That means every role must have something new in it, right? We were doing a webinar a couple of weeks ago. I'm supposed to remember what this webinar was about, but they all tend to blend together after a while. Anyway, one question we had during this webinar was, hey, what's new in Windows Server 2022 certificate services? And it's like, one, that's oddly specific, right?
Yes.
Two, there's not.
Nothing.
It's still certificate services.
There might be a new UI.
Right.
You might click a rounded button as opposed to a square button.
Right.
But, nothing has really changed in that.
Right. And I think that the point that you brought up was that, hey, the new way of doing things, hybrid. So now we're going to start learning, we're going to start teaching folks, and people need to learn how to integrate cloud services to make their on-premises solutions better and, more flexible, right? So
absolutely.
Stepping through I'm actually looking at the 801 study guide that Oren put together. And yeah, like you mentioned, he actually links the official objectives page right at the top underneath the video of him and Jeff. So Oren and Jeff Woolsey, these videos are awesome. I didn't get a chance to watch the entire thing, but they do a really good job of stepping through basically the thought process behind this entire certification, right? So for those that are listening, for those watching, I'll be sure to get the link to these videos and these study guides and the exam objectives put in the show notes below or above or somewhere around this piece of content that you're consuming. Exactly, right? One thing that stood out to me in the list of skills, and it really aligns well with Microsoft's marketing message around Windows Server 2022, is that security stuff that you just mentioned. So security, when they made, there wasn't much in the line of an official announcement, but if you paid attention to Windows Server Summit, they kept hammering on the security thing again and again and again. And yeah, this entire section here, 1.2 in the in Oren study guide, it's all security,
Yep.
password policies, block lists, security on RODC, so read-only domain controllers, or they're you still got to learn about those. How to harden domain controllers, which surprises me to this day. Even though on-prem AD has been around for such a long time, a lot of people still don't know the security best practices around hardening a domain controller, right? What do you mean I shouldn't run a web server on my domain controller? Why is that a bad idea? It's amazing this stuff.
What do you mean I shouldn't use the DC as my daily driver desktop?
Yeah, exactly. I run Internet Explorer on that thing, right? That's how I browse the web on a day-to-day basis.
Which is interesting, because that's one of the new things with Windows Server 2022 is the fact that Edge is built in.
Yep.
Which is awesome, because if you've actually tried to install Edge on Server 2019,
it's not fun.
Yeah, that basically, it probably voids your support from Microsoft if you do that, because it's so difficult and just a challenge.
Yeah, it's not fun.
That is cool that, yeah.
I think they listened to it. They got a lot of feedback on that one. And you know what? I don't know. I've always been a server core guy myself. My very early system administration days were very Linux and Unixy. So as soon as server core came out in, what was it, 2008 R2, I think it was, like, I was all in on server core at that point. So, but for those people that need it and want it, it's absolutely awesome that they've got it in there. So stepping through again the exam objectives, was there anything else that really stood out to you, Mike, that you felt like was either a surprise or maybe an area that you feel like is particularly important? Because you being a author evangelist at Pluralsight, making these courses on a regular basis, was there a particular area that you felt was super important for people to keep an eye on?
What surprised me, and I actually had to be like, to somebody that I worked with, I'm like, okay, you were right on this. I was expecting the certification to come out and be bring what you know about Windows Server, and here's how to connect it to Azure and all that. I was pleasantly surprised, mind you, that it was so server and server admin focused.
Right.
And so for those of you that are like, oh, geez, like, don't force me into the cloud, that this certification is not forcing you into building web apps or containerizing stuff.
Right.
Or what it's really doing is it's allowing you to leverage things in the cloud on-prem. So, like Azure Files and Azure File Sync, things like that, Azure Backup and Recovery, ASRs. From the beginning, ASR was designed for on-prem organizations to not have to have a hot site. So it was never designed for you to just move all your workloads up to Azure. And then ASR was one of Microsoft's first services really designed for on-prem. So that's a really important thing to know going into this, is that it's really well done how they did this, that if you can pass both of these, you are going to be a solid on-prem and hybrid administrator. You'll know how to use Azure. You'll know how to run all of your things on-prem, and you'll have all of your bases covered. So, I would, you need to know Azure ADDS, or Active Directory Domain Services.
One of those acronyms. There's so many acronyms for Active Directory these days.
Yeah. So you really need to know on-prem AD. So you're going to need to know how do force and domains work, and trusts and sites and replication, and all of those things. The other thing that you need to remember from this is that this is an associate level exam. So this is not, you architecting an on-prem organization. When you're talking AD, you really have to understand AD architecture and like, domains, subdomains, and all of that. But that just kind of goes, I think, with the territory with AD.
Yep.
But it's not like this is like an AZ 303, 304, which is a design and architect in Azure exam where you have to know things at a really crazy architect level. That most of the things that are going to be in here are going to be administrative level. As if you look through, and as an exam taker, this is a great exam tip for those people taking whatever exams it is you can tell what type of level it is without looking at the title. The title tells you simply by looking at all of the objectives. You'll see there's a ton of configure and manage, deploy. Those tell you implement. There's no design in here.
No.
So if there's not any design, there's no architecting per se. So when you're going in here, this is all going to be about you having hands-on knowledge and having the understanding of how these pieces all fit together. So, lots of cool stuff. The other thing that anybody that's looking at, when you're looking at studying for this cert, you got to watch Oren and Jeff's, both of their videos. They do a really good job of a number of things. I told both of them this, is that these are some of the best certification rundown videos I've seen because they do a number of things. One, they really focus in on the things that you need to bring to the table. They go through each of these areas in the video and go section by section and tell you what you need to know. They also tell you why you need to know it and why it's in the exam, which I think is so cool that they're sharing why this should be important to you. Because a lot of times, I was just having a conversation with Rick Claus the other day, and we were talking about the certification, and I'm like, I told him I loved the way that this was built because everything that's in there is really stuff that you want to use. It's not like the old days where, why do I have to know routing and remote access?
Fax services.
Why do I need to know RAS?
Yep.
Like, seriously? Come on.
Stuff that you're never going to use. I think I installed RAS one time in my 21-year IT career.
Yeah. So, it's a really, I think it's a really well done certification. And I think that even though there's nobody out there that has any video courses or anything on it, there's plenty of information for people to really get started digging into this. And for the most part, you could probably just roll up and, let's just say, Pluralsight, for example, we've got all of our Server 2019 videos. So
yeah,
you could probably cover a good ton of what's in here on existing material.
Right.
And then branch it out with other material. At a point, we will get out there. I'm sure, everybody else will get out there. They'll get the, the certification-based courses. It'll be more focused. But for those people that are interested in, really learning this stuff and maybe taking the beta when it comes out in December, start out with Oren's outlines and, start taking a look at the documentation. You could start spinning up, I spun up on my other machine in Hyper-V. I got a little environment going on over there that I'm playing around with stuff and, just kind of going at it from that standpoint, because anybody that's actually ever taken any of the server exams, it didn't matter whether it was, Server 2000 or 2003 or 08 or 2012, server is server. It's like, many of the things are completely the same. So I would expect that they're probably digging into the archives of some of the old exams and some of the questions to use that as and freshen them up, but to use that as kind of a basis for some of these, because a lot of the, objectives that are on the list, they're just, they're straight out on-prem. There's no Azure about it.
Right.
It's straight on-prem, Create and manage ADDS users and groups. There's no Azure in that. That's all on-prem. That's all being inside, inside your Active Directory environment in your data center.
Definitely. Yeah, what I really like about this this certification, these 2 exams, now that I've had a chance to look through them, it does cover all those core on-prem technologies. It also does a good job, in my opinion, of getting test takers certification ease. Is that how you would say it? People taking this exam, it does a good job of getting their feet wet on what I would call some introductory cloud technologies, right? So, just looking through the list, Azure AD Connect, right? That's something that you need to know, being able to sync your on-prem AD environment with Azure AD. The other thing that kind of stood out to me was, where is it here? The containers. So section 3 of the AZ800 study guide, manage virtual machines and containers, which, you're going to find is there's a lot of similarities there. Containers are, it's a different type of virtualization, right? But very similar in at a high level in terms of management. So they touch base on containers a little bit, as well as creating Windows Server container images, container networking. So you do kind of dabble a little bit in some of those traditionally cloud-related technologies, right? Which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. The Windows Server containers are, designed to be run on, Windows Server or on Azure Stack HCI.
Yep.
So, lots of people have been for years running containers. Even in the early days of containers, they were running containers in their organizations on-prem and not in the cloud.
Yep.
So,
good point.
Where I think a lot of people, whenever they hear the word containers, the first thing they think about is cloud, which is kind of relevant because, it all kind of kicked off with like Google and Kubernetes and Docker, but much of that was running on prem, but the focus is always on the cloud. So everybody's thinking containers, thinking the cloud. No, these are containers you're running in your data center. Organizations all over the world are doing it. And so what's nice about it is it prepares your organization that running a container in your data center would allow you to modernize your app inside your data center if you're not ready to move up to the cloud. But then when you're ready to move up to the cloud, then you can move your containers up into Azure. So this kind of provides you another step towards modernizing your infrastructure that doesn't necessarily require you to move up into the cloud. So yeah, it's definitely definitely a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah, that was always one of my favorite things about containers. Again, originally being a Hyper-V MVP, VMs have kind of always been my thing, right? And VMs are, they're mobile to a degree unless you have a huge VM. But the thing I love about containers is traditionally they're fairly small and they can run anywhere, right? That's the beauty of containers, right? So yeah, that's definitely a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that on the on-prem stuff. So looking through my show notes here, Mike, we've covered what the certification is. We've talked about how we think the beta will be out later this year in the December timeframe. In your experience, how long do they typically run beta? It's usually a month or two, isn't it, if I remember correctly?
I would guess that the beta is going to run December and January, and then it is going to release sometime in late January, early February.
Okay.
The was it the 700, the networking one we talked about the last time? I took the beta on that, and that just went GA a couple of days ago.
Oh, okay.
So that was around 2 months time frame. So I would expect that it's in the late January, early February time frame, and that's kind of what Oren was hinting to in one of the videos, is that was going to be the time frame for that. And I think that's kind of the normal, is usually about 2 months that Microsoft uses as far as that beta period to see, look at the questions, review them based on how people did during the beta period, and then release it out to the public.
Right.
So,
I imagine they use that beta period to look at things like, oh, hey, everyone got question 38 wrong, right? There must be something wrong with that question, right? They use that time period to kind of, I don't know that as fact, but I assume that's probably what they're doing, is they're refining questions and making sure they don't have any that are oddly worded or anything like that.
Yep.
So,
and I don't know if they do it as much these days. That I don't know how many, I'll be honest, when I take a beta exam, I don't treat it as giving a ton of feedback in it. If I think a question's really bad, I might give feedback on it.
right.
But, back in the day, that was the common practice, that the reason for the betas was that people put in a ton of feedback and stuff like that. So I would guess that they still probably get people in the community that when they take those betas that provide feedback question to question,
right,
and then they review that. But a lot of it, I'm almost sure is just, they're using data algorithms, and they're crunching
probably
the data, and they're using basically doing, psychometric, stuff on it to measure it, and, all that sort of stuff. So,
right. Okay. So yeah, we've talked about what it is, kind of when it's going to be available. We've talked about how it's 2 exams, again, AZ 800, AZ 801. We've talked about some of the stuff that's covered in those. I'm going to make sure we get all the relevant links and resources tied to, somewhere on the screen where you're consuming this content. The other thing I wanted to make sure we touch base on and cover as part of this conversation, Mike, is why do we think this cert is important for admins? I know we've kind of touched on that a little bit as we've talked so far during this conversation, but I think that's an important enough question as to, maybe why we should address that specifically. So just speaking for myself, I think, like you mentioned earlier, there's been this movement, this push towards Azure from Microsoft since 2014, 2015, right? And I feel like some people will disagree with me, but I always feel like it's been more subtle than some people think it is. That's always been the messaging, right? But I feel like with the release of Windows Server 2022, more specifically Azure Stack HCI and the Azure Edition SKU of Windows Server 2022, I feel like there's being a little bit more. I feel like that push has gotten a little bit harder now, right? And I've noticed in the circles that I'm part of that I'm starting to see a lot of people that are feeling forced into cloud technologies, right? And I feel like what we're seeing with the certification is the opposite, right? We've talked about hey, there's a lot of on-premise stuff in here. Windows Server is still a big thing. So I think it's important that people take the exam and go get certified in this, because it confirms that, hey, Windows Server is still around, your on-prem skills are still valid, they're still necessary. I think the other thing that it does, like I mentioned earlier, is it does a good job of kind of letting the test taker dabble in some of those more cloudish technologies as well. What do you think, Mike? Do you have any thoughts? Other than, obviously, it's good for them to improve their career, right? But are there any thoughts that you wanted to add in terms of why do you think the cert is important for administrators?
If you think about it, how many organizations are very close to just turning off their domain controllers?
I don't know many.
Think about that.
I don't know many myself.
Exactly.
Yep.
And Microsoft knows that as well. That, like I said before, hybrid is a destination. So admins, here's the thing that I try to tell to people. And like when I was working at Microsoft, and some of the things that are in the exam here are some of the technologies that we were really pushing to the IT pro audience was things like Azure File Sync, Azure File Share, Azure Backup and ASR. Is that if you're a completely on-prem organization, let's say, I don't really consider Microsoft 365 really the cloud per se, because if you're still running on-prem Exchange, I feel sorry for you. Just because it's so you really should be running up in micro. It's just so much easier. But I know there's reasons why people are. So I digress. That there's so many things where, let's take a look at your storage. Let's say your backup technology is coming up on renewal. You need to get new licensing. Maybe you need to get a new SAN. You got to do whatever. This is a perfect time, if you know your on-prem organization, to start looking at, okay, how could I do that differently? How can I modernize that? So things like Azure Backup and Azure File Sync and File Shares are ways to reimagine your file share setup and your backup and recovery for your organization. So that's really what I think what's so important for the admin to really think about is they need to really think about, you run your organization the way you need to run your organization. Yep. But with that, how can you modernize things and make things better or more efficient or more highly available? How can you leverage the things? And I think that's the big thing that people will take from going through all the content in here, is they'll learn how they can leverage a lot of these great things in the cloud to be used with their on-premises environment. That for me is the really big takeaways for admins is, sure, I'm working on a talk that I'm going to be doing in about a month that's basically called, leveling up to your career in the cloud. Because at this point, cloud is just a part of your career.
Yep.
It's one of those things that, I don't care how big or how small you are, there's something that you're doing in the cloud. If you're using Zoom, you're in the cloud. And that's another, and this is getting tangential, but it's a mind shift that people have to realize. If you're using a software as a service product, let's say Zoom or Dropbox or Box or any of those you're using QuickBooks. If you're using QuickBooks online, you are in the cloud.
Yep.
So if you're a small mom and pop organization and blah, 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 and you're using QuickBooks online, you are in the cloud.
Yep.
And the way you think about how you use that and how you do your work changes. And that's the important thing that people need to understand, is that, no, we're not forcing you to some place that you're not in. There's a good chance you're in. You're just not thinking about it in that way. Like I said, I don't think about Microsoft 365 as much as being the cloud. Most admins that probably are fit into this feeling like they're being forced into the cloud, chances are a lot of them are running Office 365, probably. Microsoft 365 for their messaging and collaboration.
Yep.
So
definitely. I know that when I had the option to get rid of my Exchange server at the time, this was back during the, if you remember, the BPAWS days, before it was branded as 365. What was that? Business process productivity online suite. That's what it was.
Suite.
That's right. I dropped my Exchange server like a hot potato, man. Like, I could not get rid of that thing fast enough.
Same thing.
Yep. So, you brought up a couple things in that, what you said just now that I wanted to touch on really quick. One thing, Azure Files. What I found really interesting about Azure Files is I've run into several organizations in the last couple of years that they were, back against the wall on an EMC SAN renewal or a compellent SAN or whatever. They were staring down the barrel of a $200,000 bill to put a new SAN in place. And I would say 80% of them ultimately were able to offload a good chunk of their storage infrastructure to Azure Files and then implement that on-premises component of Azure Files and not miss a beat, right? And the reality was the vast majority of that, the stuff they were storing, they didn't actively need a hot copy of, So, I mean, that's a place where the cloud provides immense value. So definitely glad to see them put that in the exam. And then the other thing that there was something that you mentioned that made me think of kind of the younger in the tooth system administrators. So what I've started noticing the last couple of years is there's an entire generation of junior administrators now that, you think back when you and I started in IT, it was all on-prem, right? We didn't have the cloud, right? Essentially, I'm making us seem older than we are, but but what I've noticed is, the junior admin of today, like, all they know is cloud. You know what I mean? All they know is Azure or AWS or O365. So I think another unique way of looking at the certification is this is a certification that those cloud-only administrators can take to get some on-premises chops if they need it, right? So I didn't even look at that certification and from that angle until, I don't remember what it was you said, but something made me think of it. I was like, oh, hey, that's, there's a whole group of junior admins that may need the on-premises chops that maybe they don't have, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, this is great for the people that have been in an organization for a while, or maybe somebody coming out of, community college, entry level, maybe they're on the help desk and they moved into their IT org, that it really is a body of knowledge that I think a wide range of people can get some huge value from.
Definitely. Well, yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned, folks, I'll be sure to get all the relevant links that we've talked about. I know we've talked about 4 or 5 different pieces of content here. Docs.microsoft.com is obviously always a great location for getting information in these certs. Certainly on the Altera dojos, we'll be getting a lot of relevant information regarding these technologies. We don't do things like study guides or anything like that in the Altera dojo, but we always tend to cover these types of things from a use case perspective. Like, hey, I'll use Azure Files as an example again, right? Hey, I'm running out of storage on premises. How would I use Azure Files to fix that, right? We always do like a lab and a demo type of content. So we try to cover it from that perspective. And of course, Mike, you've got Pluralsight and all the great content that you guys do as well. So we'll be certainly sure to get all of that stuff tracked on the show information as well. I don't know, Mike, before we sign off, is there anything else you want to touch on?
No, I think we think we just about covered everything in the kitchen sink there.
Definitely.
I'm pretty excited to take these exams.
Yeah, same thing. I don't normally get excited to take exams, but these ones I really kind of want to dig into and yeah, they'll be fun. I agree. One other thing I want to make sure we do really quick, Mike, in case somebody wants to get a hold of you after the show, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Best way to reach me is to hit me up on Twitter. Okay. So at Michael Bender on Twitter.
All right. Sounds good. I'll get that in the show notes as well. Other than that, Mike, I want to say thanks for coming out and sharing your knowledge today. It's always fun talking to you about this stuff. So I really appreciate coming out, and I'm sure we'll see you again for a future episode. So looking forward to that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. And all of you watching or listening, thanks for stopping by. Again, stay tuned for future episodes of the Dojo podcast, as well as check out our blogs, the Altera Dojo. So you can go to altera.com/dojo. We've got content ranging from Hyper-V, VMware, MSP, backup and recovery, and we also have a future dojo coming for Microsoft 365, another dojo coming for Microsoft Azure, and one that's devoted specifically to all things Windows, both client and server. So that'll be coming in the future as well. So again, you'll just be able to go to altero.com/dojo and pick your poison. Other than that, thanks for stopping by, and we hope to see you for a future episode of the Dojo Podcast. Thanks for watching.